I should have known something was off. The tension in the house was impossible to ignore, even when I tried to push it down. Laura and I had been married for 6 years, and in all that time, I thought I knew her better than anyone. I could read her moods, predict her reactions, and understand when she needed space. But lately, everything had felt different. It started with little things, slightly offhand comments, long silences, moments when she pulled away instead of leaning in. That morning after the argument, it all came to a head. The fight had been ridiculous, really. We were talking about a potential job offer in another city, a job I wasn't even sure I wanted. But Laura reacted like it was a life-altering decision. She was furious. I tried to explain that it was just an opportunity, something to think about together, but she didn't hear me. "You always put yourself first," she said, her eyes flashing. "I have my career here. My clients. My life. But that doesn't matter, does it?" Before I could respond, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her so hard that the picture frame on the wall rattled. It took all my willpower not to follow her, but I stayed, finishing my workday at the clinic. It was hard to concentrate, though. My mind kept drifting back to her words, to her anger. I kept telling myself she was just upset. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something bigger than just a fight over a job. By the time 5 p.m. rolled around, I had left several voicemails. By 6 o'clock, I'd sent texts. No replies. I started to feel a small knot of worry tighten in my chest, but I tried to ignore it. She was probably just cooling off. She often needed space after a fight. By 7 o'clock, as the evening sun began to set, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, my concern shifted. It wasn't just worry anymore, it was something else, something deeper, something that gnawed at the edges of my mind. She didn't come home by 10 o'clock. By 11 o'clock I was pacing. The thought of her out there, away from me, in the middle of whatever mess we just created, it was suffocating. Then finally I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. I sat up straight in the living room, the laptop in front of me completely forgotten. Through the window I saw her. It wasn't her car. A yellow cab, familiar to me from a couple of rides home in the past, idled outside. Laura stepped out, adjusting her bag on her shoulder like nothing had happened, walking casually toward the front door. My heart rate picked up. The cab's headlights flashed once, then it turned down the street, disappearing into the dark. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the growing storm inside me. Laura tossed her bag onto the couch, running a hand through her messy brown hair. She looked tired, exhausted even. "Just walking," she said, her tone flat. "Needed to clear my head. I went to the park, walked around, thought about things." She seemed so calm, almost like she wasn't the same person I'd been arguing with just hours before. And then she added, as if she was explaining something simple, "I went to a cafe, sat there for a while, lost track of time." I didn't know what to say. Her story didn't add up. Something felt wrong, but I didn't want to fight with her again. Not that night. "I was just worried," I said, trying to make it sound casual. "Where's your car?" She ignored the question, turning to walk to the kitchen. "Why are you interrogating me?" she snapped, her irritation rising. "Did you want me to come back furious?" I swallowed the urge to ask more questions, to press further. The last thing I wanted was to start another argument. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off. The next few days were strange. Laura went about her usual routine, working from home, talking to clients, but I couldn't ignore the small changes. The way she kept her phone face down, the way she'd swipe it away so quickly when I entered the room, the way she seemed to always have it with her, even when she went to the bathroom. Every time she left, she always looked a little more distant. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew that something wasn't right. The following Saturday I found myself at the basketball court, blowing off some steam with friends. My body was sore from the game, but for the first time in weeks I felt a little bit of peace. That was when Mike, a good friend of mine and a taxi driver, mentioned something that made my blood run cold. He casually brought up a ride he'd given Laura 2 weeks ago. "Funny thing," Mike said, "I gave Laura a ride the other night. About 2 weeks ago, I think. She seemed a little anxious. Didn't even recognize me at first, but I remembered her from the photos you always show." I froze, trying to sound casual. "Oh, when was this?" "Late at night," Mike continued. "She was near that hotel downtown, the Riverside. I dropped her off at home afterward." The world around me felt like it was slipping away. The Riverside Hotel? Laura had told me she'd been at the park. She had said she went to the cafe to clear her mind. But this didn't match. I asked Mike for more details, trying to hide the panic building inside me. "She didn't mention a hotel." "You sure it was her?" Mike shrugged. Yeah, it was her. She asked me to drop her off at her house afterward. Looked like she had left her car somewhere. I barely heard the rest of his words. The ball thumped against the court, but I couldn't focus on the game anymore. My mind was racing, piecing together things I didn't want to face. I didn't want to believe it. But now I had to know. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing back to what Mike had said. The Riverside Hotel. Why hadn't Laura told me she went there? I couldn't ignore it. The whole thing gnawed at me, a sickening feeling crawling through my chest. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that something wasn't adding up. I had to find out the truth. I needed to know. The next day I went about my routine trying to act normal. But every time Laura walked by, every time she glanced at her phone, a weight settled on my shoulders. I couldn't ignore the creeping doubt in my mind. Later that afternoon, while Laura was in the bathroom, I made my move. I walked into the study where she kept her laptop. Her computer sat on the desk, open and unlocked as it often was when she worked from home. It felt like an opportunity one had to take. My heart pounded as I sat down at the desk, glancing at the door to make sure she wouldn't catch me. I had the password, our wedding date, something that used to feel romantic but now seemed like a cruel joke. The screen lit up, revealing her open messaging app. I scrolled down just a little, barely breathing. And then I saw it. There in plain sight were messages between Laura and a contact saved only as A, with a camera emoji next to the name. The messages were graphic, passionate, and unmistakably romantic. I kept reading, the pit in my stomach deepening with each line. I can't stop thinking about you, one message read. Last night was perfect. I'm already missing you. Another one, the photo you sent, you're perfect. When can I see you again? It went on like that, the messages getting more intimate, more insistent. I felt my hands tremble as I read on. The dates on the messages showed that this had been going on for months. It wasn't just a fling. It was an affair. The worst part wasn't even that. It was that Laura had been planning to leave me. Have you talked to him about the divorce? One of the recent messages said. Divorce. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of the betrayal settling on me. I didn't know what to do with the flood of emotions crashing through me. Anger. Heartbreak. But mostly a deep sense of loss. This wasn't just an affair. This was a complete breakdown of everything I thought we had. I closed the laptop carefully, my hands still shaking. I needed to confront her. But part of me didn't want to. I didn't want to face this. I didn't want to believe it. But I couldn't turn away anymore. Laura came back into the room just as I was pushing the laptop aside. She looked at me with that calm, innocent smile she always wore when she thought everything was fine. But I knew. I knew now. David, she said, sitting down on the couch. How was your day? Fine, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need to talk to you about something. Her eyes flickered just for a second, but it was enough. I could see the hesitation in her. She knew. She knew what was coming. I stood up, walking over to where she sat. I know about Alex, I said, my voice cold and steady, even though my heart was breaking. I know about the hotel, about the messages, about everything. Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. I kept going. I read the messages, Laura. I know everything. She blinked, tears starting to well up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sympathy. I felt betrayed. I felt foolish. I can explain, she stammered, her voice cracking. David, it's not what you think. Don't, I interrupted, my voice harsh. I don't want to hear it. You've been lying to me for months. You've been planning this behind my back, and now I'm supposed to just understand? To forgive you? She stood up, taking a step toward me. David, please. You don't understand. Alex and I, we have a connection. You don't get it. You don't know how he makes me feel. I was lonely and you were so distant. I could barely breathe. Lonely? I repeated, my voice rising. You chose to lie to me. You chose to betray me. And now you're blaming me for it. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could fix us. But Alex, he understands me. He gets me in a way that you don't. The words stung, but what hurt more was the realization that she had already made up her mind. She wasn't coming back. I turned away, walking out of the room to grab my jacket. You've already destroyed us, Laura, I said, my voice low and trembling. For a liar who probably doesn't even know your full name without checking Instagram. I'm done. I didn't wait for her to respond. I couldn't. The last thing I wanted was to listen to more of her excuses. The next few days were a blur. I moved through the motions, packing my things, closing the chapter on a marriage that was never what I thought it was. The divorce was inevitable, and deep down, I knew it was the only way to heal. But it wasn't just the divorce that haunted me. It was the fact that I had been blind to everything. Laura had changed. She had become someone I didn't recognize. And that was the hardest part of all. The days after our confrontation felt like a fog, an endless blur where everything seemed surreal. I kept asking myself how I had missed the signs, how I hadn't seen the cracks in our marriage before they had split us apart. Laura and I had built a life together, or so I thought, and yet it all seemed to crumble in the span of a few weeks. Her betrayal felt like a dagger to the chest, and no matter how many times I replayed our memories, the pain didn't lessen. I couldn't just move on. Not yet. I needed answers. I needed to know everything, every detail, every lie. I had to understand what I had missed, why Laura had turned to someone else. Why Alex? Why him? I hired a private investigator. His name was James, a man who had once helped a client at the vet clinic with a serious issue. He was discreet, efficient, and most importantly, he understood that I didn't want to rush into a confrontation until I had all the facts. A few days later, I received an initial report. At first, it seemed like just more confirmation of what I already knew. Laura and Alex had been meeting regularly. They had met twice a week for months, sometimes at the Riverside Hotel, sometimes at Alex's apartment. The photos James had gathered were crystal clear. Laura and Alex entering and exiting elevators, holding hands, kissing in parking lots. It was as if they were trying to erase any doubt that they were more than just friends. But it didn't stop there. James went further. He dug into Alex's background, and what he found made my blood run cold. Alex wasn't just some charming photographer. He was a pattern. James uncovered details that suggested Alex had been involved with at least 3 other married women over the past 2 years. Each of these women had a similar story: photo sessions, instant connections, promises of a future together, only for the relationships to end in heartbreak. Emotional manipulation, false promises, and ultimately, the destruction of marriages. I was shocked, but somehow it made sense. Alex had been playing the same game with Laura, and she had fallen for it. I wasn't the first man he had destroyed, and I wouldn't be the last. But the most chilling part of the report came on the last page. James had learned something I never could have imagined. Alex's relationships weren't just about love or lust. They were about control. Alex was a manipulator. His charm was his weapon, and his victims were left broken, vulnerable, and confused. The women he targeted were emotionally exhausted by the time he was done with them. They believed his promises of love and happiness, only to find themselves abandoned when they were at their most vulnerable. Laura hadn't just been having an affair. She had been preyed upon. The weight of it all was too much. I didn't want to confront Laura without understanding everything, but I wasn't sure I could handle the truth. I didn't know how much more I could take. That night, I sat in the living room, my mind spinning. I had the facts now. I knew what had happened, but I didn't know how to face Laura. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but the other part of me just wanted to leave. To walk away and never look back. But I couldn't leave without a final confrontation. I needed to hear it from her, needed to know the truth from her lips, even if it would destroy me in the process. The next day, I waited until she was gone, off to one of her meetings, to make my move. I walked into her office. Her laptop was sitting on the desk, open and unlocked. I hesitated for a moment, then sat down. This was it. I had to go through with it. I opened her email inbox. The first few messages were about work, client updates, and routine tasks. But then I found it. Another message from Alex, this time with a subject line that made my stomach turn. I can't wait until we can be together. The message was short, but it was full of longing and promises, exactly the same as the messages I had seen before. It was clear, she was planning to leave me for him. I clenched my fists, holding back the urge to throw the laptop across the room. I knew everything. There was no denying it now. Laura had already made her choice, and I was just a man who had been left behind. The next few hours were a blur. I tried to focus on work, to distract myself, but all I could think about was the betrayal. How could I have been so blind? How could I have loved someone who could do this to me? When Laura finally came home that evening, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to look at her. She walked in like nothing had changed, smiling that same fake smile, as if the world hadn't just shifted under our feet. "David?" she asked, sensing the tension in the room. "How was your day?" I looked at her, my heart pounding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers, to tell her everything I knew. But all I could do was speak the truth. "I know about Alex," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I know everything. I know about the hotel, the lies, the affair. I know you've been planning to leave me for him." Her face went pale. The blood drained from her cheeks as if the life had been sucked out of her. David, please. I didn't want you to find out this way," she stammered. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. But I had heard enough. I didn't want her excuses anymore. I didn't want her apologies." "You've been lying to me for months, Laura," I said, my voice cutting through the air. "And now you want to apologize? It's too late for that." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel anything anymore. The woman I had loved, my partner, my wife, was gone. All that was left was the wreckage of a marriage that had never been what I thought it was. "I'm done," I said, turning away from her. "You've already destroyed everything. There's nothing left to save." I didn't wait for her response. I didn't care anymore. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, leaving her standing there, broken and defeated. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of relief. The next few days were a blur of emotions: anger, heartbreak, disbelief, but also something I hadn't expected: relief. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to keep up the facade of a happy marriage when everything was already falling apart. I had seen the truth, and now there was no going back. The divorce papers arrived a week later. I had always thought it would be difficult, that I'd struggle with the decision. But there was no hesitation. I signed them without looking back. The marriage was over. Laura's lies had shattered everything, and I had no desire to try and piece it back together. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But that didn't mean I was okay. Far from it. The days felt long and empty without her around. I couldn't escape the memories, good and bad, that had haunted me for years. Our first date, our wedding day, the vacations we'd taken together. They all seemed like a lifetime ago now, as if they had happened to someone else. But I tried to push forward. I threw myself into work, staying late at the clinic, dealing with the steady stream of patients that came in each day. The animals needed me. And for a little while, focusing on them helped distract me from everything else. It wasn't until a month after the divorce was finalized that I ran into Mike again. He was the one who had unknowingly opened the door to the truth, casually mentioning the hotel ride that Laura had taken. I hadn't seen him since the night I found out everything, but I didn't hold it against him. He hadn't known the full impact of his words. We were at the local diner, grabbing a coffee after a quick game of basketball. Mike was sipping his drink, his eyes flicking nervously over the rim of his cup. I could tell he had something on his mind, but he was hesitant to bring it up. Finally, he cleared his throat and spoke. "I never really apologized, man," Mike said quietly, avoiding my gaze. For what I said. I didn't know it was going to blow up like that." I looked at him, surprised by his sudden apology. "You don't have to apologize, Mike," I said, shaking my head. "You told me the truth. That's all that mattered. Honestly, if it weren't for you, I don't think I'd have ever found out what was really going on." Mike shifted uncomfortably in his seat, rubbing his neck. "I feel bad though," he said. "I never wanted to hurt you." I smiled faintly, not out of amusement but more out of understanding. "You didn't? You just gave me the push I needed to see things clearly. The rest of it, that was all Laura. All her decisions." The conversation shifted after that. We talked about basketball, work, and other small things that didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But even as we joked around, I couldn't escape the gnawing emptiness that lingered in the back of my mind. I had learned the truth, but the truth didn't make the pain go away. It didn't make the betrayal easier to swallow. The weeks passed slowly. Laura tried to reach out a few times, leaving voicemails and sending texts. At first, I wanted to respond, wanted to know if there was any possibility of salvaging something, anything, from the wreckage of our marriage. But every time I thought about it, I remembered the look on her face when I confronted her about Alex, the way she stood there with tears in her eyes, apologizing but offering no real explanation. And I realized that even if I had tried to forgive her, I wouldn't have been able to trust her again. Not after everything that had happened. One day, out of nowhere, I received a call from a lawyer's office. It was the final settlement, the last step in closing everything. I had been so focused on just getting through the divorce that I hadn't even thought about the financial aspects of it. The paperwork was simple: the house, the joint bank accounts, everything. It was all split down the middle, as if it was nothing more than a business transaction. I signed the documents without feeling much. But there was one thing that caught my eye in the settlement papers, something I hadn't expected. A clause about a non-disclosure agreement that Laura had insisted on including. She didn't want any of the details of her affair with Alex to come out in public. She didn't want the community to know what had happened. I felt a rush of anger at that, but also a deep, bitter laugh. She didn't want anyone to know about her lies? Too late. The damage was already done. The people who mattered already knew the truth, and the rest? Well, they could believe whatever they wanted. It didn't matter anymore. After I signed the papers, I put everything away. The settlement. The divorce. All of it. And slowly I started to rebuild. I spent more time with my friends, more time doing things that made me happy. I took up new hobbies, things I'd neglected while I was wrapped up in a marriage that had never really been what I thought it was. I focused on the little things that I had forgotten in the years I had spent trying to keep someone else happy. There were days when the memories still hit me like a wave. I'd be going through my things, or I'd hear a song that Laura used to love, and for a moment, it would all come rushing back. But I had learned to let go. And as time passed, the weight of the betrayal lifted. I realized I was stronger than I had ever thought. I wasn't the man I had been 6 months ago, the man who was blind to everything around him. I had seen the truth. I had faced the worst of it. And now I was moving on. The days stretched on, each one a little easier than the last. But there were moments when the silence in my apartment felt unbearable, when the loneliness crept in. I had built my life around Laura. She had been my partner, my companion, my everything. Now, the space that had once been filled with her laughter, her smile, was quiet. Empty. I didn't like feeling sorry for myself, so I pushed those moments aside. I focused on work, on the simple things I had once taken for granted. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I found solace in the small victories, getting through a tough day at the clinic, finishing a project I had been putting off, or even just sitting with a good book on a Saturday afternoon. I started going to the gym more regularly, running on the treadmill to clear my head, lifting weights until my arms burned. Exercise gave me something to focus on, a way to push back the memories that threatened to overwhelm me. But as much as I tried to occupy my mind with new routines, a part of me was still stuck. Still thinking about Laura. Still wondering how I had missed the signs, how I had let myself get so deep into a lie. I avoided mutual friends for a while, not out of anger, but because I didn't want to hear about Laura's side of things. I didn't want to know if she had moved on, if she was already rebuilding her life with Alex, or if she was still trying to salvage some semblance of what we had. The thought made my stomach churn, but I couldn't control it. I knew it was petty, but I wasn't ready to face that reality yet. Then, one evening, I ran into Greg, an old friend from college who had always been there for me. He was sitting at the bar at a local pub, nursing a beer, his face lighting up when he saw me walk in. "David," he called, waving me over. "I was just thinking about you." I smiled weakly and walked over, taking a seat beside him. "I've been keeping busy," I said, trying to sound casual. "Busy, huh?" Greg said, raising an eyebrow. "You're not hiding from the world, are you?" I laughed, though there was no real humor behind it. "I'm not hiding. Just taking my time to figure things out." Greg studied me for a moment, then leaned in. "I know it's been rough, man. And I get that you're going through a lot. But you can't keep running from everything. You gotta face it eventually." I looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. I had been hiding. Hiding from the pain, from the anger, from the betrayal. But maybe Greg was right. Maybe it was time to face it. Time to stop letting my past define me. "How's everything with you?" I asked, changing the subject, not quite ready to talk about it yet. He shrugged. "Same old. Work's been crazy. But I've been keeping up with everything. You know how it is." We chatted for a while, the conversation drifting between small talk and catching up. But the words Greg said still lingered in my mind. I had to stop hiding. I had to stop letting the past control me. A few weeks later, I found myself on a Saturday afternoon walking through the park, something I hadn't done in a while. The sun was out, the sky was clear, and the air had that crisp autumn feel to it. It was peaceful, almost comforting. I had gone there with no particular purpose, just needing to clear my head. But as I walked, my thoughts wandered. I remembered how Laura and I used to walk through this park on weekends, holding hands, laughing about nothing. It was a memory that stung, but also one that reminded me of who I used to be. Who I had been before everything changed. As I neared a bench, I saw someone sitting there, a woman I didn't recognize. She had her back to me, but something about her felt familiar. I stopped in my tracks, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't explain. She turned then, looking up from her book, and our eyes met. It was her. Laura. I didn't expect to see her there, but there she was, sitting in the park where we had spent so many afternoons together. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, her expression more guarded, but there was no mistaking her. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Was this some coincidence, or was she waiting for me? Did she want to talk? Apologize again? The questions buzzed in my mind, but I couldn't find the words. Finally she spoke. "David," she said quietly, her voice soft but tinged with regret. "I didn't expect to see you here." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had spent months thinking about this moment, imagining what I would say, but now that it was happening, I wasn't sure I was ready. "Yeah, well, it's a small world," I replied, my voice a little sharper than I intended. I quickly looked away, trying to push down the wave of emotions that had rushed over me. "I've been thinking a lot," she continued, her gaze never leaving me. "I know I can't undo what I did. I can't fix everything I broke. But I just wanted to say that I'm sorry, David. I was wrong. I was so wrong." The words were familiar. The same ones she had said before, but this time they felt different. There was no desperation in her voice, no hope that I would forgive her, just a quiet acknowledgement of the damage she had done. I stood there, the weight of everything hanging between us. I could feel the anger and sadness rising in me again, but I swallowed it down. I had to face it. I had to face her. "I've moved on, Laura," I said finally, my voice steady though my heart still ached. "It's over. I've let it go." She nodded slowly as if she had already known the answer, but still, a tear slid down her cheek. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. I just didn't know how to fix things." I took a deep breath and turned to walk away. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to fix. The past was behind me, and though it had been a painful journey, I had come out stronger. The sun was setting as I walked away from her, my footsteps slow but firm. The park, the place where so many memories had been made, would always carry traces of the past. But I had learned that I couldn't live in those memories forever. It was time to move forward. And I was ready. The weeks following my unexpected meeting with Laura felt like a final, bitter chapter had been closed. I didn't feel any sense of closure, no dramatic epiphany, but there was a quiet understanding that I was no longer the person I had been when she first walked out. I had survived the worst of it, and now I was learning to rebuild. I threw myself into work even more. The vet clinic had always been a source of comfort for me, a place where I could focus on something tangible. Animals didn't lie. They didn't hide parts of themselves or betray you. They were simple, honest, and gave back without asking for anything in return. The days started blending into one another again. I went through the motions, appointments, paperwork, late-night research. But something inside me had changed. There was a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. A sense of peace, almost, that came from knowing that no matter how painful the past had been, I could keep moving forward. I reconnected with old friends, the ones I had neglected in the years I had been wrapped up in my marriage. Marcus, Steve, Owen, they were all there, always ready to lend a hand or share a laugh. It was with them that I felt most at ease, like I was slowly carving out a new version of myself that didn't carry the weight of betrayal. One evening, as I sat at the basketball court with Marcus, the weight of the past seemed to lift for a moment. We were just talking, laughing about the ridiculous shots we'd made, or missed, and I realized that I hadn't thought about Laura at all. I hadn't wondered what she was doing or where she was. It was the first time in months that I had been fully present in the moment. "Man, you're doing better," Marcus said, a smile on his face as he caught his breath. "I can tell. You've got your game back." I chuckled and shrugged. "I guess. Just had to take some time, to figure things out. Everything. You deserve it," he said, clapping me on the back. "You've been through hell, but you're coming out stronger. You'll be all right." I nodded, grateful for his words. But I knew deep down that the true strength was coming from within. I had faced the worst. I had confronted my pain, let it wash over me, and then I had let it go. Later that week, I decided to take a trip on my own. I hadn't traveled in years, too caught up in the day-to-day grind. But I realized that I needed to do something for myself, to remind myself that I was still capable of growth, of enjoying life again. I booked a short weekend getaway to a small town by the coast. The place was quiet, with the kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was soothing, and I spent hours walking along the beach, taking in the salty air and the endless horizon. It was during that trip that I had a moment of clarity. I realized that I was no longer the person who had been betrayed. I was no longer the man who had spent sleepless nights, wondering what had gone wrong. I was someone new, someone who had learned to pick up the pieces and move forward. On the flight back, I felt something I hadn't in months: hope. I wasn't quite sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was open to it. The world didn't stop after Laura had left. It kept moving, and I had kept moving with it, one step at a time. Back at home, things were quieter than ever. The apartment, once filled with memories of Laura, now felt like my sanctuary. I had turned it into a place of peace, a place I could come to and find myself, not the ghost of a past that no longer served me. I had started going to therapy. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Talking through everything, the anger, the sadness, the confusion, helped me untangle the knots in my heart. It wasn't an instant fix, but every session brought me closer to understanding who I was now, and how I could move forward without carrying the weight of my past. One evening, as I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through old photos, I found one of Laura and me from our wedding day. I stared at it for a long time. There was a time when I had looked at that photo with love, with hope for the future. But now, it was just a memory, a chapter in a story that had come to an end. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I just accepted it for what it was. I put the photo down and leaned back in my chair, looking out the window. The city was alive outside, buzzing with energy, with people moving, living. It was a reminder that the world went on. And so did I. I didn't need to keep checking my phone for messages from Laura, waiting for some kind of apology or explanation. I didn't need to dwell on the past, constantly wondering if there was something I had missed. I had my life now, and that was enough. I had learned that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to let go. To accept the past for what it is and to move forward, not with regret, but with strength. The future was mine to shape. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited about what it might hold. The weeks stretched into months, and with each passing day, the ache in my chest, the one I had carried for so long, grew fainter. It was like a scar that still twinged every now and then, but it wasn't fresh anymore. I had learned how to live with it. I had learned how to keep moving forward. The therapy sessions were helping more than I expected. Talking to someone who didn't know my history, someone who could offer perspective without judgment, allowed me to process everything without fear of being trapped by my emotions. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I started to understand that I wasn't just moving on from Laura, I was moving on from the version of myself that had let someone else define my happiness. I didn't realize how much of my identity I had given up until I was alone in that small apartment. In a strange way, being on my own gave me the freedom to rediscover who I was. I was no longer just David, the husband, or David, the guy who had been hurt. I was David, the man who could choose his path. And for the first time in years, I was choosing to take my time, to focus on the things that mattered to me. Work continued to be my anchor. The clinic was busy, but I had found a new rhythm. I was more focused than I had been in years, more present with the animals and the people who needed me. It wasn't just about the work anymore, it was about me reconnecting with a part of myself that had been lost to the noise of a toxic relationship. But as the days went by, I realized that I had started to miss one thing more than I had expected: companionship. It wasn't loneliness exactly. I wasn't desperate to fill the emptiness left by Laura. But there were times when I wanted to share the quiet moments with someone who didn't come with baggage, someone who could understand me without judgment. I hadn't thought about dating for a while, but as the months passed, I felt ready to at least try. I wasn't looking for anything serious, I wasn't sure I was ready for that. But the thought of meeting someone new, someone who could offer a fresh start, was appealing. I wanted to see what it felt like to be seen for who I was now, not who I had been with Laura. I signed up for a dating app. It felt awkward at first, putting myself out there again, but I reminded myself that this wasn't about finding the one. This was about reconnecting with the world outside my own head. And maybe, just maybe, it would help me discover what I needed to keep moving forward. The first few dates were nothing special. A couple of pleasant conversations over coffee, a few dinners that didn't go anywhere. But one evening, about 3 months after I started, I met someone who caught my attention. Her name was Emily. We met at a small bistro in the city, a place I hadn't been to before. I wasn't expecting anything, it was just another date, another attempt at seeing what was out there. But from the moment we started talking, something clicked. She was warm, easy to talk to, and had a sense of humor that reminded me of myself before everything had fallen apart. We talked about work, our hobbies, and life in general. She was down to earth, passionate about her career in graphic design, and was in many ways the opposite of Laura. There was no pressure, no expectations. It felt easy, natural, like two people just getting to know each other. As the evening went on, I realized I was genuinely enjoying myself. For the first time in months, I felt a connection with someone that wasn't defined by the shadows of my past. Emily didn't know about my history with Laura, and I didn't feel the need to bring it up. She was someone new, someone who didn't see me as the man who had been betrayed. She saw me as David, the person I was becoming. After dinner, we took a walk along the waterfront. The city lights reflected in the water, and the cool breeze felt refreshing. We didn't talk about anything heavy. There was no need to discuss the past or rush into anything. We just enjoyed each other's company, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of the world slip away. At the end of the evening, Emily smiled as we said goodbye. "I had a really good time tonight, David," she said. "Let's do this again sometime." And just like that, I realized something important. I wasn't ready to rush into a relationship, but I was open to the possibility. Emily was kind, interesting, and, most importantly, she gave me the space to be myself. There was no rush, no need for things to move faster than they should. I didn't have to compare her to Laura. I could just let things unfold naturally. In the weeks that followed, Emily and I continued to see each other. We spent more time together, getting to know each other without the pressure of defining anything too soon. I still wasn't sure what the future held, but I was no longer afraid of it. I was learning to trust again, not just others but myself. The journey hadn't been easy. It had been messy, painful, and at times, unbearable. But I had learned more about myself in those months than I had in years of marriage. I had learned that I didn't need someone to complete me. I was already whole. And now, with Emily in my life, I was learning that there was space for new beginnings. I didn't know where things would go, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to find out. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I had survived the worst and I had come out stronger. As the months continued to pass, I found myself settling into a rhythm. Emily and I had become comfortable with each other, a gentle and steady kind of connection. There was no pressure, no rushing things, just an understanding that we both had our lives, our pasts, and that it was okay to take things one step at a time. For the first time in a long time, I found myself thinking that I could be happy again. Not in the way I had been with Laura, but in a deeper, more grounded way. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't without its challenges. But every moment with Emily felt genuine. We'd spend evenings cooking dinner together, trying new recipes, or sitting in front of the fireplace just talking. Sometimes we'd take long walks around the city, and I'd catch myself laughing at things I would have once thought trivial. The difference between this and my past relationship with Laura was clear. There was no game playing, no secrets, no pretense. What Emily and I had was based on honesty. And while it wasn't always perfect, it was real. As I looked at my life now, I could see how much I had changed. I had learned to let go of the past, of the hurt that once defined me. I had come to terms with what happened between Laura and me, not out of acceptance of her actions, but out of necessity for my own healing. I no longer needed to carry the weight of betrayal with me. It was part of my story, yes, but it didn't have to define me. I had also learned the importance of setting boundaries, of being true to myself without apologizing for it. I was no longer afraid to speak my mind or walk away from situations that didn't serve me. It was a freedom I hadn't known before. But as much as I was beginning to enjoy the quiet peace in my life, something inside me still felt like it was missing. It wasn't a void that Emily could fill, nor was it something that could be filled by any one person. It was a deeper realization that I needed to find meaning in my own life, on my own terms, without relying on someone else to define it. I had always loved animals. Since childhood, they had been a source of comfort for me. Growing up in a small town, I would often find solace in the company of the animals I took care of. It was no surprise that I had chosen a career as a veterinarian, but in the months since my divorce, I realized something that had been quietly pulling at me. I needed to do more. I wanted to make a bigger impact. I had always been content working at the clinic, but I knew there was more I could do for the community. There were countless animals in need of homes, countless people who didn't know how to care for their pets in the best possible way. I wanted to give more of myself, not just to my work but to a cause that mattered deeply to me. One day while I was walking through a local animal shelter, I had an idea. There were so many dogs and cats in need of adoption, animals who had been abandoned, neglected, or simply forgotten. What if I could create a program that paired people in the community with the right pets for their lifestyle? What if I could work with local shelters to make sure these animals got the homes they deserved? The thought excited me. I spent the next few weeks working on a plan. I reached out to shelters, contacted local businesses to get their support, and talked to colleagues who shared my vision. Slowly the pieces came together. By the end of the year, I launched the program. It was a success beyond my wildest expectations. Not only did I help find homes for countless animals, but I also started giving educational seminars on responsible pet ownership, working with families to ensure that their new pets would thrive. It felt good, so much better than I had expected. Helping those animals, knowing that I was making a difference, gave me a new sense of purpose. It wasn't about filling a hole in my heart or trying to make up for what had been lost. It was about creating something good, something that was rooted in love and care. Emily was incredibly supportive of my new venture. She helped me with some of the promotional work and even volunteered at the shelter a few times. Our connection deepened as we worked together, not as partners who were trying to build a life, but as individuals who respected each other's goals and passions. It was a relationship built on mutual support and understanding, something I had never truly known before. But even as I continued to grow in my work and relationships, there were still days when the past would resurface, unbidden. On those days I would sit in my apartment by myself, reflect, and remind myself how far I'd come. I wasn't the same person who had been blindsided by betrayal. I was someone different, someone stronger, more self-aware, more compassionate. It was a journey I had never expected to take, but one that I was proud to be on. I had gone from a man who was broken, confused, and lost, to a man who had rebuilt himself from the ground up. And in doing so, I had found my true self, someone capable of creating change, of finding happiness again, and of making a difference in the world around me. I had learned that life doesn't stop when one chapter ends. It keeps moving forward, and so do we. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time I felt ready to take it, one step at a time.